Okay.
All right, got it.
We're good. All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. I'm excited to reconvene an interview with you're my first repeat guest, but if you've read comics, you 100% know who Jim Starlin is. And if you don't read comics, the odds are you've still enjoyed his creations, because Jim's responsible for some of the major Marvel comic creations that have made it out into the big screen. Thanos, Drax, Gamora, Shang-Chi, who has a movie coming out. Who is, oh, Thanos, there he is. He's right there on your shirt.
That's Thanos, yes. I forgot
Yes.
I had it on. I just looked at my picture.
There's serendipity. So I was lucky enough to interview Jim back in May about the return of one of Jim's creations, DREADSTAR. So thank you for the opportunity to follow up on our earlier conversation. Before we start, I just want to let everyone know, if you want to catch that earlier interview, you can do that, as well as my review of DREADSTAR Returns on this site, theconventioncollective.com. So Jim, I talked too much, so now it's your turn. How has DREADSTAR been received?
Very well. I came at it with a certain amount of trepidation after being gone so long in the hand. But, you know, I have this new inker who she'd be the first one to tell you she fixes up my artwork tremendously as she goes along. And people have seemed to have been liking it. And we are in the process of working on the next book. I'm 75 pages into the 100-page graphic novel, and Jamie is somewhere in the 20s. I always a bit ahead of it.
And you mentioned Jamie, that's Jamie Jameson, who actually was in our earlier interview. And so she's working on the next project with you.
Oh, yes, most definitely. She's, you know, still having some COVID issues. She had got it twice, but she's trucking along there. She's a real trooper as far as the work goes. And as soon as she gets on inking them, I color them. So it's a production line. I escaped Detroit and the assembly line, but I've created my own production line instead.
Very cool. Well, for people who might not be familiar with what DREADSTAR Returns is, you know, it used to be you do comic book issues, but this is basically a graphic novel all done at once. So talk to us about DREADSTAR Returns, and then I'm going to poke you a little bit about the next project.
Okay, DREADSTAR Returns was a number of the characters: DREADSTAR, Eddie, Willow, Syzygy briefly, and a few other of the characters returning after a 25-year hiatus. I took the actual time frame that I took off and put it on the characters, and we find them, you know, a quarter century later, and they've all sort of worked themselves into where they belong. You know, Willow's still running things as the cybernetic Wizard of Oz character in the Empirical Galaxy, which is now called Willow Consortium. And Eddie is a law enforcement officer with Teuton as his sort of deputy, along with Fix. And DREADSTAR, who is always the anarchist without a second act, who never could figure out how to live in a society that he liberates, has finally found his spot. I won't say anything more about that, but he's kind of comfortable, and things go bad for everybody unexpectedly. And so the gang has to get back together again and deal with what they think is a mysterious peril that's endangering the entire universe. And it turns out that it's something they're quite familiar with that they hadn't expected to see ever again. And basically, it's a story about unrequited love, despite the fact that we have a very onerous character at the beginning who comes to a bad fate that a number of folks might recognize.
Yes.
But you know, that's just the lead in, and then we get into the real story around page 20. That's the nice thing about doing 100 pages is you can actually do sort of a Homer Simpson kind of lead in where Bart gets in trouble at school, but the main story is Homer blowing up the power plant. So I had a lot of fun with this, and we're working on the sequel, Jamie and I, right now. And the first book was done during the pandemic quarantine. Easy to knock out 100 pages when there's nothing to do except to draw or collect dead wood around property and clear it out. So this time it's a little bit, the production is a little bit slower, but the story itself is inspired by the pandemic, and it's called DREADSTAR versus the Inevitable.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's sort of it's not a pandemic per se that they're facing, but it is something just as irreversible and uh, unstoppable in some ways. That's the whole idea of the story, is having to accept that you have limitations in life, which a lot of folks we see have a hard time realizing that. I mean, we do not all walk on water. And sometimes we have to acknowledge reality for what it is. And no amount of political or religious belief will throw you from, save you from the consequences of denying reality.
I have to
So that's
applaud you for
basically the
not.
story.
I have to applaud you for not calling the sequel "DREADSTAR Returns" again. You have a much more creative, much more creative title.
I don't think anyway. I think you're the first one to suggest that.
Yeah,
As soon as I threw out the Inevitable, everybody seemed to like that title.
yours is
It was so
better.
weird.
Yeah, there's a reason why you're in the comics industry, and I just talked to you because that's a much better title.
Okay.
So, if people, one of the things that you mentioned, COVID, one of the things that people miss due to the COVID pandemic is that opportunity to go to Comic-Con, interact with the artist, maybe get an autograph. But I hear there may be an opportunity that something coming up very soon that might scratch that itch for folks, with you at least in particular.
This coming weekend, actually, I'm going to be at the Crusty Bunkers comic book shop, Neal Adams comic book shop in Burbank, California. And we will have copies of DREADSTAR Return there to sell, to buy, to sign. We'll sign other things that you may be bringing in. There will be some posters that we are selling. Jamie Jameson and I will both be there. I think it's at 4:00 in the afternoon on Sunday.
Yep.
And just Google Crusty Bunkers comic book shop, and you will find directions on how to get there. And if you're in the LA area, come on out and say hello.
I can even do you one better because I did some research. I even have the address for folks. It's 4708 West Magnolia Boulevard, Burbank, California. So you can
I should remember that because I have sent many things there.
you can type it into your GPS right now and just head over there and get in line. So that'll be a Sunday, the 15th, I think. Does that sound right?
That sounds right. And there's a really good Mexican restaurant down the street called Tequila's that anybody who gets there too early can go down and have lunch there. I do that all the time.
Excellent. So people, one of the things I didn't get to mention this earlier, but I read DREADSTAR Returns without having read your prior DREADSTAR work. You mentioned you had the time frame based on the real gap between working on it. And I just kind of wasn't back into comics back then. So I appreciated how you can pick up the story without having this rich backstory that you obviously are very familiar with the characters. Was that something you did on purpose where you wrote it to be accessible to new readers? Because it's clear you have a love for these characters, but I was able to pick it up knowing really nothing about it.
Oh no, it was very definitely set up so that a new reader could come in. I mean, that was why we had the character page at the beginning, just so you knew who everyone was. It gave enough history where you could go into the story and not be confused as to who they were or what they could do. It's 25 years later. You can't expect everyone from 25 years ago, and we were doing pretty good sales back then, to come back now. So I am very much dependent on new readers also now.
Are the same characters from DREADSTAR Returns going to make their way back into DREADSTAR versus, was it the Inevitable? Did I remember that right?
Inevitable, yes. One of them only makes a brief appearance because he's too big to fit on the ship. You guys will have to guess who that is. Everybody else is there, and we have got a few other characters who are coming in. It's a different kind of story. So once you see the cover, you'll know that there's another character from the past who's popping in. He looks a little different, but it's that big white head is a dead giveaway as to who he is.
And do you have an idea? Obviously, you mentioned you've got a kind of that Detroit conveyor belt system, whatever. But do you have an idea when it might be done? I know it's putting pressure on you because Creative work doesn't work that way.
Right now it's when it's done, we had a lot of trouble with Ominous on the distribution of the Kickstarter on this one. They did a real nice job on the omnibus and a really terrible job. So I'm not exactly sure that we are going to continue with that work relationship. And so DREADSTAR, who has had many publishers along the line, may have one more, and we'll see what happens. But I should have my part of it done by my part of the pencils by August. I'll easily have it done by the end of the year, even with all the things I have in the process of doing. But I think we'll have it out by next summer in print. I think there's a very good chance. And maybe the Kickstarter, we're probably going to do a Kickstarter thing with it, but that'll be probably in January, and probably have the book out by the summer again. My plan is to get one out every year.
Cool.
And this will still stick with that same schedule. In fact, it should be better this time because we'll get the distribution part of it better.
You mentioned that DREADSTAR has seen multiple publishers. You mentioned the Kickstarter, things like that. Since we've even talked last time, I know I touched on this before, but the idea of content being owned by the creators versus the companies and they take control is getting more and more press. You've probably heard of it's not quite the same thing, but the thing with the Black Widow movie and Scarlett Johansson and not getting hurt. So the big companies are getting a lot of scrutiny right now. Talk to me about DREADSTAR and your decision to go this route as opposed to taking it to one of the big shops.
Well, there's this change in the copyright law way back in 1976, and that's when DREADSTAR sort of got its gestation and period started. Basically, it used to be that if you worked for Marvel or DC, you signed away all your rights on the back of the paycheck. And Congress came along and said that was no longer legal to do. And so the term work for hire came into being. I'm getting very professorial on you here a bit, but it's the only way to answer the question. It came down to you before you ever did the work, you had to sign a work for hire contract if you wanted to work on Superman or Captain America. I chose to work for some smaller publishers at the time, starting off, actually I started off with Marvel as their Epic line, which was sort of a smaller thing, which was creator owned. Archie Goodwin was the editor on it at that point. So we did that, and then I went off to work with Eclipse on The Price, which was the Syzygy Darklock's origin story. Came back working back at Marvel through Epic. We did the Epic comic line, started Epic, and started through that. Because of pay problems, I ended up taking it over to First Comics, where we finished the runoff on my version of DREADSTAR. Later on, pulled it back onto Malibu for Peter David to do a female version of it, who is going to get featured into the third graphic novel.
Oh, cool.
It's bringing her back. I'll get back to that on a future date. And now it's been at Ominous. There was a slave labor reprint, but that hardly counts. It was black and white preprint somewhere in the 80s, I think it was. And now we'll see what happens at this point. It's your choice. You can either give away your property to somebody else and get a paycheck for a while, or you can take a chance on your own talent and hope that it will pay off, as DREADSTAR has been paying off at this point. So,
and when you go to each of these publishers, do you tell them, I'm retaining DREADSTAR? If this doesn't work out, I can now take it to your Ominous, and if that doesn't work out, I can take it somewhere else. Are they cool with that? Is that how that works?
Oh, it's expected.
Okay.
A lot of these places are strictly, like Valiant, not Valiant. Jesus, what's their name? The guys who Jim Valentino's publishing company. That's strictly work for hire. Why am I blacking out on its name?
I'll try to find it while we're talking. Power of the internet.
Yeah. Yes. Both of us are blacking out. They're strictly work.
Image.
Strictly creator owned. Image. How can I forget that?
I thought that's what you were saying, but I want to make sure before I threw that in there.
Yes, Image Comics. That's strictly creator owned, and it's all a back end deal. So a lot of times you come in there, and I'm doing the same thing with Ominous. I'm not getting a paycheck. I'm doing the work, and then I'm making the money off the back end. It's how you tend to do it with your own creations. So, I'm comfortable enough with doing that and have a nice cushion I can fall back to if it doesn't work out. Fortunately, it's been working out. And as a result, I really don't do much of any work for the majors anymore. Occasional cover if something strikes my fancy, like a Metal Man or something, but that was kind of weird. But, for the most part, I'm happy working on just Red Star these days.
All right. Well, you opened the door for just one more question because I love the inside business stuff, as you can tell. So most of the big guys, big publishers have these 1,000 variant covers, and you mentioned that you might do a variant here and there. How do you get asked to do a variant? Does the comic book company call you? Is there an agent that reaches out because, hey, we want a Starlin cover? I mean, how does that work? And
well, the Metal Man cover is the last one I've done for DC, and I just happened to be at a convention with Dan DiDio, and he was writing the book, and he asked me to do it. And this is when I first started working with Jamie, and she was sitting at the table next door, and she went, "I want to ink it," and that's how that one happened. Since then, we have done one, a Deja's Thoris variant cover for Dynamic, which they approached us with that idea. They said, "Would you like to do this? We can do variant covers and what have you." So it's variant covers have variant avenues of how they happen. Sometimes you may approach the publisher and see if they want something done like that. I don't think there is any set way. I think that's about as best I can give you into the secrets of the universe on that one.
I've always wondered because there's sometimes they'll have like 7 or 12, and I'm wondering if the artist is like, "I really love this book, I want in on it," or they just say, "Hey, this person is a." It sounds like you can just be at a convention and maybe that's how you get picked, but it's really cool to understand.
Well, when we did the variants posters for DREADSTAR, the omnibus version, most of the folks who did those just wanted to take a shot at doing DREADSTAR. Andy Young and Bart Sears both, they had those drawings. They wanted to, say, "Hey, let's add that." They were part of Ominous to begin with. I think Spencer Beck asked George Perez if he wanted to do one, and George said, "Oh, sure. I never drawn DREADSTAR." So, George is like this little kid who you can attract with little toys and stuff like that. And he'll draw you a cover. It varies depending on the artist and what have you.
All right. Well, this is your chance to pitch, Jim. Is there a character that, I don't want to get your mailbox full, but is there a character that you've always said that would be fun to just try a cover on that you want to throw out there for anyone listening who might want to approach you for that opportunity?
No one in particular off the top. At one point I wanted to do a mini series involving Namor the Submariner, but that was way back at the time of the towers falling. No, nothing off the top of my head. Sometimes people just throw things at you and it's the right moment. Like the Metal Man cover was the right moment. I'd just never drawn them and would have liked to. And, I can't think of anybody else off the top of my head. Sorry.
No, I apologize for opening the door because I realize now that everyone's going to come this Sunday. 4 o'clock to Crusty Bunkers and start hitting you up for for variant covers or something in addition to autographs. Or I'm saying, oh, he likes variant covers. We're gonna hit him up. So hopefully
I should warn that I'm not a sketcher at these things.
Yeah.
I sign books and I don't do sketches. A lot of folks get disappointed in that, but after my hand in that, I limited my time down doing things like that. If I'm going to draw, and it does give me problems sometimes, I'm going to draw the DREADSTAR book and not just sketches off the top of my head.
Yeah, we talked about this last time. I guess for people who didn't listen to the interview, it's a pretty fascinating story. Do you want to talk a little bit about what happened in your hand and how you were able to come back after all that time?
Well, I had a compressed air accident. It blew, I don't know if you can see it so much that way, but it blew a big hole in my hand right here. It's all healed over now, but for about 3 years there, I couldn't draw. I spent a lot of time squeezing rubber balls and doing other exercises that were supposed to strengthen the hand. And eventually started working with a stylist on doing the corrections for the color corrections on the DREADSTAR Omnibus, because we didn't have digital files. We had to make digital files. That's how far back it was. So we had to scan the actual pages, and then I went through and touched up things throughout the 1,500 pages or so it was. And I think that strengthened my hand. And long around that time, I met Jamie Jameson, who was to become my inker, and she started bugging me to do a little sketch of Dr. Doom for her. Dr. Doom's her favorite character. And I kept saying, no, I just don't draw anymore. And she got Spencer to start bugging me. And finally, one day after a convention, I was back in my room and I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And much to my surprise, I didn't have to run off to the sink to run cold water on my hand. It actually didn't cramp up like it usually did. And that was actually the beginning of Jamie and I's collaboration, because after that convention, I went home and did some pencil sketches that I thought I'd sell at the convention, and they came out okay. And when I got to the convention, Jamie was there, and she had been working with Keith Giffen, who didn't show up for that convention, and she wasn't sure what she was doing, what she should do with herself. So I said, well, why don't you ink these? And she sat there that weekend inking these Thanos drawings and that, and I went, well, that's pretty good. And when I got around to doing DREADSTAR, I contacted her and said, how would you like to do 100 pages? No pressure. Just your first job, 100 pages.
Maybe
but
she
it's
didn't
worked
know.
out pretty well.
Yeah, it looks good. So yeah, I love that story from before, and I'm really glad that you're able to come back, because DREADSTAR is great. I'm excited to see the next chapter in DREADSTAR next year. One final time for people listening, if you want to get an autograph, what types of stuff will you have? That you'll have the DREADSTAR Returns book people can buy and have you autograph.
We have some posters. I think we're going to have posters of Batman, Thanos and Warlock, a Shang-Chi one, and I think there may be one more. I'm not sure what. I sent some files, and it's been chaotic because I've got busy here on the East Coast, and I got to get back over there to the West Coast tomorrow. And so a lot of this is going on without me being present. So I'm hoping my fingers are crossed that everything's going to work out.
But even if people wanted to bring like their favorite earlier Starlin work, you would sign that as well.
We do signings, yeah. It was like a regular comic book convention in some ways, yeah.
Excellent. So for folks, just one last time, August 15th, 4 p.m. Pacific at Crusty Bunkers down in Burbank, California. You can meet Jimmy and Jamie, and if you go, tell them that Darren says hello, although I just talked to him 2 days before. So thanks for the time, Jim. I appreciate you once again.
All right, you take care. We'll be talking to you later.
Thanks.
All right.
You want to stop recording?